Well, thank you everybody for coming and welcome. Welcome, Paul V. So yeah, first of all, we're through this amazing technology that we have, we're going to record this meeting. So it'll be online for anybody who missed it. So just don't scream out anything that you don't want to be on the internet. And so my name is Max Rome. I live at 28 Raymond Street down the road, and I am the Senior Stormwater Program Manager for the Charles River Watershed Association. And that's my colleague, Deirdre Johannes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deirdre Johannes. I'm a Senior Climate Resilience Associate with CRWA.
Hi, all. I'm Cabell Eames. I'm the new Advocacy Director for the Charles River Watershed. So I'm new and here and learning, and it's great to meet you all.
Sure. And yeah, we'd just like to acknowledge some of the many great folks who are out here today. Senator Brownsberger, thanks so much for making the time. Pallavi has been involved with this work for the beginning of what we're showing. Tommy Isidoro. I mean, so just everybody. Here's Emily Norton, who's our executive director. We're family from part of the community affairs. He'll be giving us a little update later on in this presentation. But we're just going to kind of get into it, and we've got a wonderfully small, or a good group here, like a perfect group here. So let's really think of it as a conversation, because that's the point. So chime in, interrupt. We're trying to have a conversation. So just a little bit about what we're going to try and do. We're gonna really talk about how do we get to a swimmable Charles River, and try and kind of share some of the information, some of the data that we have about what it's going to take to get us there, and then talk about what is Allston's role in getting us to that swimmable river, and then what role does new development play? You know, what role is new development going to play no matter what? And then what do we as a community really need to advocate for? And then we're going to spend a bunch of time. There's so many different really high level big projects that are happening in the neighborhood right now. We're going to try and use this presentation to name a lot of them, because I know different people are tracking different pieces of these projects, and talk about kind of what the whole opportunity is, and try and just start some momentum together for, you know, thinking about all of these projects kind of at the same time, and thinking about what we as a neighborhood, what we as people who care about the river and want to be connected to the river, and do and advocate for. And, you know, I'll state this again. We'll say it in a couple different ways. You know, we want to grow the base of advocacy needed to make sure that these really big projects are great projects. And we want to, you know, something that we'll be returning to and throughout this presentation is that, you know, these large projects that we're seeing have really, a lot of them have really great sustainability initiatives. But if the only type of sustainability actions, if the only type of greening actions we're taking in our neighborhood are just through new development, that's a very small piece of the pie. We're leaving a lot of pollution on the table. We're leaving a lot of energy.
Raise your voice a little bit. Raise your voice a little
higher.
Bit.
Okay. In volume, not pitch. Only joke I'll make about that. Voice. This is me and Dira. A little bit about the Charles River Watershed Association. You know, we're here in Boston. We think about the Charles in a very specific way. We think about the lower basin. But the Charles, you know, just like the marathon starts up in Hopkinton, 80 miles to get here, and it goes through 35 towns. So, you know, I studied environmental engineering, so I always have to be reminded to start here. But who knows what a watershed is? Is that a word that everybody's comfortable with? Seeing a lot of nods, yes, but this is the way I'd say it. If you care about what's happening in a water body, if you care about the Charles River, you actually, and you want to see that Charles River cleaned up, you actually have to care about every single drop of water that ends up in the Charles River. And that's what a watershed is. It's the area where if a drop of water falls within that area, it ends up in the Charles River. So even, even down in Franklin, even up in Lincoln, that is all connected to the lower basin. So decisions that are made there affect whether or not we're going to have a swimmable river. They affect flooding. And that's what our group focuses on, kind of really taking the whole picture of the river. What are some of the threats to the Charles River? Flooding and drought. We don't see a lot of flooding on the main stem of the Charles River, but you can see it. I mean, we don't see it down in the lower basin, but you can see it higher up in the river. You can see it in the tributaries. If there are folks who spend time in Newton, there's a tributary called the Cheesecake Brook, which is flooding during every heavy rainstorm. That's not the only one. Flooding is a really big issue. Flooding within the neighborhood is starting to become a really big issue. Drought is another really big issue. With climate change, what we're seeing is more intense storms, but we're seeing more of that rain is falling in the intense storms, and we're having these longer periods of drought, especially during the summer. So that's a big challenge. Another challenge is just water quality, bacterial contamination. I don't know how many people here know that in Boston and Cambridge, we regularly have discharges of untreated sewage into the river. It's called combined sewage, but what it is basically untreated sewage that's mixed with rainwater or partially treated. That's a big issue. And even without those sources, there's other sources of bacterial contamination into the river. Extreme heat. So I think we all experience extreme heat in the summertime in this neighborhood in a really tangible way. Walking to Star Market, it's getting hotter. That heat is exacerbated by the way we've built our environment. All of these hardscape elements, the streets, the sidewalks, the lack of trees, that exacerbates this heat in our neighborhood, but it also exacerbates the flow of pollution into the river. So that's why we're talking about all of these things at the same time. And then finally, environmental injustice, which is that, the parts of our watershed, the parts of our city that have the least resources are the parts that are kind of hit the hardest by these issues. And that, shows up no matter kind of how you slice and dice these statistics. It shows up racially, it shows up by language isolation. Those locations that are hotspots for racial diversity that have less wealth are the places where there's the most extreme heat. Okay, now these are the slides that these are the ones that I really love to share. The goal is a swimmable Charles River. And that's not just my opinion. That is the law. That is the law in the United States. 1972 Clean Water Act says all of the waters of the United States should be swimmable and fishable. And this, I think, like the real takeaway that I want to aggravate people with is that this river was swimmable. There were 7 public beaches in the lower Charles River until 1949. I'm blanking on this woman's name, but she still lives in Cambridge. She was just interviewed she did a great little interview in 2015. And there are many people in our community who remember going down to the banks of the Charles River and swimming on a hot summer day. So, this is something that's been taken from us. We should not think of the Charles River as dirty. We should be very mad that it's not clean. It's the law that it must be swimmable. That's what a Class B water is. This is another kind of way to say it. Globe press release from 1995. EPA launches this thing called the Clean Charles Initiative. That basically kind of kickstarts this modern era of the restoration of the Charles River. At that time, they said, hey, 10 years from now, if we spend our money well, if we're diligent, if we're purposeful, we are going to have a clean, swimmable Charles. Head of the Charles, 2005, we're going to see rowers jumping out of their boats and taking a dip at the end of the race. And we are really still not there yet. And that is an outrage. That, you know, that's what I want to say. That's kind of, I think, the attitude that we need to take. There's been a lot of progress in the Charles River. Bacterial contamination has really decreased. There's been incredible investment in sewage infrastructure to make sure that those combined sewers are going to Deer Island, 10 miles out past Boston Harbor, getting discharged into the ocean, you know, which is a good thing from the perspective of the Charles River, from the perspective of Boston Harbor. But as we've seen water quality improve, we've kind of realized that we have another problem. So, you know, who here has kind of seen this sign, this yellow sign, cyanobacterial blooms on the Esplanade? I don't know if folks have noticed that. Yeah, so these are, you know, these are blooms of potentially toxic cyanobacteria. I'm a scientist, so I just have to nerd out here for a second and say cyanobacteria. Bacteria, if you remember your biology classes, that means it is a single cellular organism that hasn't invented organelles yet. So everything's just kind of floating around in there. And cyanobacteria is actually the organism that invented oxygen on planet Earth. They're the ones that invented chlorophyll. When they evolved 2.5 billion years ago, they transformed our Earth's atmosphere radically. So we have cyanobacteria to really thank for all life on this planet as we know it. But right now, they are finding the Charles River an incredible place to bloom and grow. And that's for two reasons. One, we are just feeding them. All of this stormwater runoff that goes into the river, you know, instead of having that stormwater kind of filter through soils, come through tributaries, it's basically going into pipes and it's going right out into the river. So it's as if we're just like throwing fish flakes into a fish tank. We've got a ton of food in the river for cyanobacteria. Another thing is that they are such an ancient organism. They evolved at a really different time in the history of the Earth, and they can do something that's pretty weird, which is that they can continue growing when water temperatures are like 70, 75, even 80 degrees. All the other algae species that are kind of native to this area, above 65, 70 degrees, they stop growing. Above 75 degrees, they actually start dying. So the Charles River, when we built a dam across the mouth of it, we created a very still urban basin that reaches very, very high temperatures in the summertime. It's above 75 degrees for weeks on end in the summer. That's only getting worse with climate change. So we've kind of created a perfect environment for cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria, we could talk about this a lot more. I'd love to talk about this a lot more, but basically they have some evolutionary tricks to compete with other organisms. And that means they produce toxins that can kill dogs, that are harmful to humans. So this is really a big problem in the lower basin right now. We have a plan. So I'm not gonna go crazy about this, but just like we have some plans for you know, a climate neutral state by 2050, we have a plan for a phosphorus neutral Charles River by the year 2039. So there, you know, really good science has been done to figure out, okay, how much pollution would be too much into the river. We've got numbers. Every single town has a different number that they have to hit to stay in line with the ecological health of the river. And EPA is administering a really serious plan. It's called MS4. I don't expect that many people have heard about it, but it means nothing less than completely reinventing our stormwater drainage system so that the water is going into the ground instead of going right into the rivers. This is a plan that's going to get us to a swimmable Charles. We're in year 5 of it. We're kind of at the end of the beginning. This plan is not a fait accompli. It's not necessarily going to succeed. It needs support. People need to know about it. We need to pressure our politicians to do it because, you know, what municipal governments are saying right now is they're saying, we don't know how to do this. Our DPW isn't used to doing this type of work. We don't have a stormwater program that's funded. in Boston in April, for the first time, we're going to see a stormwater fee. That's to fund this type of work. So we're very fortunate to be in Boston, in a city that does take this very seriously and does have strong infrastructure to tackle this problem. And just, a little bit about how do we do it. This is a bit of a comic, but the point is, in the pre-developed landscape, most of the water that fell on the ground was getting into the groundwater. It was moving slowly into tributaries, then down into the river, then into the harbor. Today, most of the rain that falls on the ground is picking up all the pollutants that are on parking lots, on city streets, putting it into a pipe and going right into the river. And we need to change that urban hydrology back to something that's a lot more natural. And that's how we're going to correct this problem. And I'm going to hand this over to Dira.
Great. So I'm going to go over a couple slides that kind of shows a bit of the history of Allston before Max kind of starts. Oh, thank you. Before Max talks a little bit more about, the current plans and future plans for the neighborhood. I took a screenshot from what was 1774 Allston Brighton, and as you guys can note, that the river is still in a similar shape, but you see a lot more of your wetlands next to your river. Those are your naturally floodable areas. So when we get high waters, we get flood waters, those places are where water can get stored. And back then we used to live kind of behind all of that floodable places. By 1903, you can see that a lot has been developed in Allston Brighton. Some parts of where we see Herder Park today is still your wetland areas, still can be flooded naturally. And then I think we have another. Yeah, and then today, in comparison to your 1903, you see a lot of our roads are closer to our rivers. They're on top of where water used to flood and needs to flood. And so a lot of what we're talking about, like Max was saying, a lot of our landscape has changed so that we've included or implemented all these impervious surfaces where surfaces used to be pervious. So where water used to get absorbed by the soil, where they could be naturally flooded, are now places that are hard and places that people tend to go now, but can get easily flooded with all the climate change that we're expecting. Oh. Number. But in summary, if you think about the watershed, most of our lower basin, so places like Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, those are our most urbanized parts of the watershed. So the earlier graphic that Max showed, where you see up to 55% of your stormwater running off into the storm drain, that graphic is representative of what Boston experiences when we have a rain event. And I took some screenshots as well from the Climate Ready Boston, just to kind of have everyone familiar with what is the neighborhood already experiencing. So Climate Ready Boston has already highlighted that Allston Brighton neighborhood experienced very high daytime land surface temperature. So during the day, especially in the summer, these neighborhoods are what you can consider as your urban heat island neighborhoods. They're experiencing higher temperature than your surrounding neighborhoods because we have so much impervious surfaces, lack of trees that might provide shade, as well as, cooling down the ambient air. And then this is a screenshot from Boston Water and Sewer Commission's inundation model. I just wanted to highlight, what in a worst case scenario, Allston Brighton is very vulnerable to your sea level rise. So where you see red is where flood water can get deeper than 2 feet. In the case that you have a nor'easter with 100-year rainfall, and as well as a 2070 sea level rise and a storm surge. So that's kind of all of the worst case scenarios that could happen. And not that I want to make it a very gloomy conversations, but we have to prepare ourselves for the worst that may come. And then this is a screenshot of Climate Ready Boston's map for inland stormwater flooding. So not considering your sea level rise, but this is where flooding is happening just based on precipitation. And so I'm sure you guys are familiar where flooding is happening in your neighborhood. And this is just a quick summary for from Climate Ready Boston, where it shows near term, medium term, and long term. So thinking about today's inland flooding, future inland flooding as well. And then this slide is basically a summary of most of what we have today to manage our stormwater is what we call our gray infrastructure, right? So it's your traditional method of having your storm drain on the street that collects water as it moves across the street and sidewalks, and then it gets directed into the river without being treated. So this is what we currently mostly have for our neighborhoods. What we want as an organization, and what we want for a more resilient community in the watershed, is having more green stormwater infrastructure, or GSI, or folks might also refer it to just green infrastructure, or GI, to manage our stormwater, because these systems, they help store stormwater where they get captured. They can also help filter out stormwater pollutants, including phosphorus, before that water moves on to a storm drain and then going into the river. And they can also absorb, waterway. And so this is the kind of system that we're hoping to see more and more in all different parts of our watershed. And this is a quick or a screenshot that I've gotten about previous or past plans that have been created for Allston Brighton neighborhood, including the Western Avenue corridor, the 2022 Herder Park master plan, as well as Harvard's institutional master plan, and as well as the I-90 Allston multimodal project. So this is just snapshot of what plans have been done in the past. And then I think Max will go over. This might be me. All right, so just a little history of CRWA's involvement in Allston. We have been, long involved in the community. A big part of that is because Allston Brighton is right by the river. So there's a lot of things that happen in the neighborhood that can impact the river. And so we always want to stay engaged with what's happening here. So one of the first things, as you all know, Harvard owns, a lot of the land in Allston. And so as an organization, we've been heavily involved in advocating during the public process for Harvard's institutional master plan from 2013. And then now Harvard is also, engaged in the new public process for their, the next 10 years for the institutional master plan. And the image that you see here is a concept sketch from when we advocated back in 2007. Back then we were already advocating for more greenway and more green streets in the Allston Brighton neighborhood that would help, manage stormwater in the neighborhood, to manage all of that water that will end up going into the Charles River.
Yeah. We'll also just ask folks. I mean, I think that this is an amazing picture. So BPA's consultant WXY put this together. I mean, I just take it in for a second. Like, this is almost all of Lower Allston that's in flux, that's kind of currently going through these master planning processes. And the question is, are these projects going to deliver climate resilience for the neighborhood? Are they going to help us really take a huge bite out of the pollution coming from the neighborhood into the river? Or are they going to kind of lock in some of the mistakes that we've made over the last 100 years? So that's really kind of what's on the table for all of us, for the river and for this neighborhood. And I think what's so amazing about this work that was done in 2007 is it was really looking at how did water flow through this neighborhood? There was a stream actually that drained Allston, And, this is a very common story. That stream was kind of channelized. And now, what used to be a stream is basically flowing through pipes into the Charles River. And this is a bit of foreshadowing, because there's a huge project right now, the North Allston Storm Drain Extension Project, that's gonna really change this picture in some meaningful ways. So what I want to kind of harken back to is some really good work that was done by the Charles River Watershed Association and the BPDA in 2015, basically looking at the natural drainage. They said, okay, first off, what was that sub watershed that fed that stream? This is a picture of what that looks like. Okay, and if we kind of wanted to think of that sub watershed as a little microcosm of what needs to happen in our neighborhood, what do we need to understand? How can we understand where the sources of pollution are coming from? And what that study found, they kind of chunked out the neighborhood in a couple different ways. They looked at the residential part of the neighborhood. They looked at Western Ave. They looked at parking lots, and they looked at Harvard's institutional property, and they looked at Harvard's kind of newly acquired property that's going into development. And what they found was that about 23% of the pollution load into the Charles River is coming from these new high priority sites that Harvard is developing. About 34% of it comes from Harvard's existing footprint. So even though that existing footprint has a lot of green space, it's just so large that the decisions that are made within that footprint, have a really big role in influencing, water quality in this area. And then finally, another third of that is the residential neighborhood. The neighborhood streets that we all pretty much live on. So I'm just going to kind of walk through. This is a study that's, I think, really, really worth dusting off right now when we're kind of having this conversation. This was done in 2015, 9 years ago. And we're going to kind of look at this, and we're going to see some of the things that were recommended happened and some of them didn't. And I think we can use that to think about how to move forward. So this is the kind of Wyndham, Seattle, Hopedale neighborhood where I know there's a bunch of people here who live on this map. And a key finding of this study was that we are not going to get, we're not going to get to that phosphorus neutral Charles River only by addressing the priority projects, only by addressing development on Western Ave. 30% of the savings that can be achieved are going to come from retrofits in the neighborhood. And maybe that's just intuitively makes sense. Kind of a deeper cut on that is that the best thing we can do to prevent pollution is keep water in the ground. The closer we get to the river, the harder that is to do, because the water table is very high. So there's not as much ability for the ground to absorb that water. It's a lot easier. And so, Mark, we'll talk about it a little bit, but the new Science and Engineering Center that Harvard constructed is amazing. It was designed to handle the 100-year flood, the 100-year storm event, but it does not infiltrate. That water doesn't go into the ground because the water table is so high there, because it's an area that has a lot of urban fill and contaminated soils. The better places to do infiltration are up in the neighborhood. So, in 2015, the focus was really to say, hey, we need to do good projects when they're new projects, but we need to do green streets retrofits. And I think these pictures are just so great. Some of them are pretty humble. Imagine what can be done just with a green buffer between the sidewalk and the street. Imagine what can be done. We'll talk more about this Coolidge Road project in a little bit, but this picture just cracks me up because this is right next to Swiss Baker. And shout out to Harvard for making that project happen, because this absolutely happened. So we've got some amazing successes and some not quite yet. One of the recommendations was to do green infrastructure retrofits on Western Ave. And today we can see that a lot of that has really happened. That's important. That's about 2% of the load, of the pollution load into the river. It's really, really important. We talked about this Science and Engineering campus. This is an incredible building. It's a building that goes beyond the beyond the basics, it's not only dealing with the phosphorus pollution, but it's also really dealing with the flooding. You know, this is a building that is actually going to decrease the flooding that's around it from these intense storms. Swiss Bakers, A+. Coolidge Road, neighborhood greening, it just hasn't happened yet. And I'm gonna make one more point about this science and engineering campus, because I think this is really, really important. This is an incredible project. It can handle the 100-year storm. So if 9.4 inches of rain fall on this building, it's going to capture every single inch of those rain. But if 3 inches fall, but it's outside of this building, it doesn't deal with any of that rain. So this building is like a castle on a hill. It's an incredible engineering achievement, but it's not connected to the rest of the neighborhood. And what we really want to see in this neighborhood, what we really want to see in our watershed, is district scale planning. When we're building things that have a lot of volume, a lot of capacity, we want to see that capacity connected to the existing drainage network. So we're not just taking care of ourselves, we're not just taking care of the new parcels that we're building, but each great new project is actually taking some load off of the neighborhood. And that kind of brings us to this incredible North Allston Storm Drain Extension project. So I don't know how closely people are following this. You know, a lot of this is in the road. You know, a lot of this is in the ground already, but it's got a big hurdle to pass. It's got to be connected to the Charles River. You know, right now what we have a drain project, a project that would create an 84-inch pipe that would discharge, you know, significantly polluted stormwater to the Charles River. And Mark will be quick to point out, you know, something that is in this project. They've got a vortex separator, they've got grit screens. So it's not, you know, it's not trash that's going to end up in the river, but there's still nutrient loading that would come through this pipe. So, you know, as the Charles River Watershed, and especially kind of going back to this 2015 study, what we really want to see is we want to see sub-watershed scale thinking. We want to see, how are we not just going to get this water out of the neighborhood, but how are we going to handle the water within the neighborhood to avoid flooding, but also to avoid nutrient pollution in the neighborhood and deliver some real benefits for the folks who live here. And another thing I'll just say is, you know, what we have right now, kind of as you saw from that slide from 2007, you know, the current drainage kind of follows the historical stream, Smelt Brook. NASDAQ is going to change that. It's not, you know, it's not good or bad, but it's kind of really, you know, making a significant change to the, you know, the original hydrology of this little area. Yeah, so that's a lot. And then we're just going to kind of name some of the big projects that are coming up and how to get involved. And yeah, Mark, if you're up for it, I'll invite you up here to give a little, or just stand up and talk a little bit about the Harvard's institutional master plan that's coming up in 2024.
Do that now?
Yeah. Oh, boy. Yeah. Well, we can hold off if you want, but
no, okay. Let's do it.
Yeah.
I'm Mark. I thank you, Max, for bringing me here. Oh, there, I gotta get my stuff to make right. So I know a lot of you, and those of you I don't know, it's great to meet you. My partner is Kendall in the public affairs group. So she and I work together, along with our planning colleagues and the whole big Harvard team, working with the Harvard Allston Task Force, working with nonprofits like CRWA. And we've got, Harvard owns a lot of land in this map, right? And we've chunked it into separate planning areas. And we've got processes going on right now that are Harvard-led, that are city-led, and that are going to significantly impact the topic we're discussing. We can talk about the storm drain, but right now I want to talk about Harvard's IMP. I wish I could, someday we'll be able to like throw this on the screen, but I can't do it yet. We filed our 10-year renewal. So we have an IMPNF, which is a notification form It gets our process started to begin what'll probably end up being about a year, give or take, of regulatory review to once again figure out what the wrapper is for Harvard institutional projects. When I say institutional projects, I mean that these are projects that Harvard is thinking about in the 10-year timeframe that are toward the mission of teaching and research, and are handled by the city in that way. We've got about 160 acres of geography within the Harvard INP. So I think it's perfectly detailed here. Nice job. In the hatched blue. We've got 6 large projects, or six major projects that are worth talking about. We're at the very beginning, and I'll leave these fact sheets right here maybe, and I'm happy to hand them out. There's a QR code that will bring you to a document that I think I left over there. It's about 100 pages. And that will get us through to a comment period that's going on right now. And in a month or two, we will end that comment period and we will start working on our INP, which is the document that will get the most scrutiny. It will be very significant. It will be studies. It will be technical studies. It will be more information on planning. It will also be about benefits. So Harvard, like last time, is going to propose, we're in the process right now because we filed on Friday, 10 years of benefits for 10 years of projects. So that is going to be so I can see it there. That will be a significant part of the work of the year ahead. What did we do last time? So we brought this idea of a transformative project to fruition last time in our 10-year INP that was approved in 2013. That's the Harvard Ed Board. We did significant grants, and we're continuing to do those grants through the Flex Fund and through the Partnership Fund that support public realm projects. There's a great alignment between Harvard and the Charles River Watershed Association as it relates to opportunities to improve the public realm. And we've had a lot of success as part of those improvements in talking about stormwater, both water quality and flooding. So that's the overview. Of the 6 projects in Harvard's INP, 3 of them were approved 10 years ago. And we want to continue to keep those in the plan. We can talk about those if people are interested. There are also 3 new projects. One of them is a cooking kitchen. One of them is a racquetball or a racket sports center. One of them is another building on the athletics campus. But a main component of the story of this renewal is that we're continuing to think about things in a way that have a lot of consistency with 10 years ago. So it's planning, it's benefits. We've got a year and we want to keep it going. So please pick one of these up. I have a meeting coming up on the 19th with the Harvard Allston Task Force. I keep looking at Tony when I talk about the task force. Is there anyone else? Ed is on the task force. Katamori, Councilor Braden, and Senator Brownsberger aren't technically on the task force, but they're our elected officials. And Priscilla, you're on the construction mitigation subcommittee.
Ed.
With Ed. And Paula is like a task force VIP. Please take one of these, and please, if you take a picture of this with your camera, link you to the project website. We've got this in 6 languages, and we've got a meeting coming up on the 19th.
Mark, in these areas that the watershed is talking about, institutionally, what structures, departments you have in Harvard that work with the watershed?
Well, so on academic research partnerships, I wouldn't be the best person to talk about that. I can talk about, not anecdotally, but we have grant making opportunities, yeah. And then we have sort of advocacy interactions. And one of the early slides did a good job of pointing out all of the instances that Charles River Watershed is involved in the regulatory process through advocacy.
But in your planning department, do you have specific departments or special professionals who work on these kinds of issues as you're developing your master plans?
So flooding,
yeah,
stormwater, water cleanliness
Yeah.
is a part of every project.
Yeah.
And it's a part of planning. There's been a good amount of Harvard planning, right? ERC framework plan, IMP being some of the major ones. More and more, there's city-led planning. So I think it depends on the process. And certainly when it's Harvard-led, it's a component. There's a water quality and flooding section of the IMP.
Sure.
And we end up talking about it a lot. But it's when a project comes out of planning and into proposal where you're really able to nail down what will be the best practices, how much water will this site take in. And the trend, especially lately when we talk about the science and engineering complex and other modern Harvard projects, is that the ability to push these projects into proposal and into reality gives us the opportunity to take on a ton of stormwater on site and do some other things that clean the water, or at least help that it doesn't have to go into the existing system to get to the river. So it's all interconnected and it's a balancing act. We also have things like the Greenway that help. I will put these out. Please feel free to click this because this will get you to the regulatory information and to a opportunity to comment, which is really important.
Are those comments going to Harvard or to the city?
That's a great question. So we, as part of our public engagement, we do have instances where we take in a lot of feedback and we have a lot of public meetings. These comments go directly to the city. So we're in a public comment period right now, which is why this
So
is.
then the plan, the IMP gets submitted to the city as well.
So a week ago, the IMP notification form was submitted to the city. We're now in a comment period on that. Once that ends, we get back a ton of information that helps us take about 4 months, 6 months to build the next document, which reacts to all that scoping information.
So we do, sorry, so we do receive the comment. The comments don't just disappear into a.
Right, they actually end up in that major document. But this is the city-led process. And I'm really glad you asked that question because who is receiving the comments is important. It's the city, then Harvard gets them, and we need to react, respond, address them in the next filing.
Will the Watershed Association be providing like high-level technical comments on the sort of stormwater mitigation in the IMP?
Yeah, we absolutely will. And then, Mark, thank you so much for kind of being here and sharing this. But I think like the real takeaway, and I'm probably not necessarily the right person to say this, but many other people would say the same thing, is that those of us who are in this room today can be very impactful on this process if we speak with one voice and if we're on the same page about what we want to see out of this project.
Yeah, this is just a question from earlier. You had shown as part of the mitigation processes that are available, rooftop gardens.
Yeah.
That was one that I didn't see anything shown that's been implemented. What would you probably have modeling equipment or software that could project what the impact would be if all of the, let's say, Harvard properties, let's say, both institutional and non-institutional, all their flat roofs proactively and retroactively had rooftop gardens, and what that might contribute or not, given the water level, what groundwater levels.
That's a great point. That's actually a really great point, and I'm going to give you the kind of 2-second answer for that.
Okay.
Which is that green roofs are an amazing strategy in the Harvard campus. Not that they, the science and engineering complex does have green roofs. They've not been, as you know. But everything that I said about the water table does not apply to green roofs. Green roofs, they don't care about the water table because they're on the roof. And effectively, when you put a green roof on a building,
Stays on the roof.
it's all the sudden that building goes from acting like an impervious surface to acting like a pervious surface. It soaks up that rain, it releases it slowly. During the summertime, there's evaporation and evapotranspiration. So green roofs are a really good technique that's not really been applied very widely in our city or certainly in this area. Yeah. And there's other cities like Philadelphia where this is like really part of their plan for managing stormwater.
What could you project if Harvard, at least on their properties, mandated that their buildings get green roofs, how that might getting closer to the goal?
Yeah, we can do that, and we can talk about that.
Okay. Because that could be included in.
But if you think
master
about
plan.
it, yeah, great. That's a great comment. Thank you very much. Yeah.
You talked a lot about the engineering and science complex. That was got the green check mark. How about the 4 current projects that are both under construction right now?
In this phase A that is that
Ones that have just tower cranes up right now. How are those going to come out as far as the green check mark?
That's it. Mark, do you know? Can you speak to the
2.75 inches of rainwater across the entire Phase A site, which of the 14-acre initial part of the ERC is, I think, 8 or 9 acres. So 2.75 inches across at least 8 going on 9 acres, with Phase B coming up soon. So that's the infiltration. Or, excuse me, that's
the capture. So they're going above and beyond what Boston requires. Credit. Now, in fairness, if this project was in Watertown, every single new project that you do has to do the 100-year storm. So as progressive as this project is, Boston, we're still a little bit, we're getting lapped by Watertown. Watertown, even if you have a single family home and you are converting it to a 2-family home and not making any other changes, you have to provide storage for the 100-year storm on site. And I say this hopefully purely in the spirit of productivity, which is that Harvard is doing more. They're a leader. There's more yet to be done. And this thing that's a little bit harder to understand is it's not just about what you do to manage the water on your own property. What we really need and what we really need leadership in, and there's not good examples of this. Watertown's not doing it yet, though we're working with them. We need examples of projects that look at the drainage area and say, how can I help? How can I take the existing load off of the stormwater pipes? How can I alleviate existing flooding within the neighborhood? So that's an opportunity for Harvard to show next generation leadership in this area.
A couple of different questions or comments. One of the things that comes up frequently in our community meetings is the above ground power lines, which do 2 things. One is they prevent us from planting trees because you can't plant trees underneath the power line and have any effective shade. I know that I live surrounded by power lines at my house. So having some efforts made to eventually, and sooner than when I die, which will probably be 20 or 30 years, get the lines underground would probably improve the green space in the entire neighborhood. And the fact that people keep saying it's expensive, it's not anymore, it's not going to get cheaper. So doing this sooner rather than later would be helpful. The other part of that is as we repave our streets or add sidewalks, and that includes the Harvard building areas, they should all be permeable type pavements that are required to help at least absorb some of the minimal rains on these 2-inch rainstorms, not 100-year storms. And that every bit of concrete that we put down is a travesty to the neighborhood. And I think there needs to be some effort from the city to really improve that. I used to live in Watertown. I know about some of this stuff. And so it's at least they're making the effort there. But I think we need to do a couple of different things and stop avoiding these questions. They said, it came up just the other day with power lines again. We talk about it literally every month. And I'd have 3 trees on my property if I did not have power lines. Right now I have one little stubby one. That's it.
Okay, we're going to talk more about that a little bit later, but that's really helpful. And then I just wanted to acknowledge Liz. Thank you so much for coming, Councilor Braden. And
thank you. Back to follow on this comment. I think one of the challenges that we find is that with the shortage of parking, people are, the sort of default position is to pave over their yards. And I think it's really important to try and find information about products that are available or techniques that we can use to continue to make, if you want to park it, put cars in your yard or whatever, that surface still continues to be permeable. And I know I saw a piece, somebody shared it a few years ago about Buffalo. It was a restaurant parking lot that would absorb 3 inches of rain, and it was permeable. And I'm going like, okay, it's not maybe as big as sort of tarmac. First of all, it absorbs heat and becomes a heat radiator. And second of all, all the runoff just runs right off. And then the other thing I'd love to see is more sort of, we did in our yard, we went to, the CDC was doing a presentation way back, maybe 15 years ago, maybe when this was happening, 2015. And Charles River Watershed was there. I think Pallavi might have been the one that was speaking. And they talked about rain gardens. And we were, at the time, we had flooding in our basement. So we were thinking about doing a dry well. And then we had this presentation about rain gardens. And we said, oh, well, that's better. It's not as expensive. And so we went home and started digging madly. And we created a rain garden in our backyard that takes, now we don't park cars in the backyard, but it takes all of our rainwater, all of it, and puts it in the yard. So we don't use hoses all summer. And it's really, it's, you know, it does need some maintenance over time because it gets clogged up. But, you know, I think there's sort of space for a lot of education for householders and people in the neighborhoods to develop, you know, to do their own rain gardens in their yards, because I think it certainly decreased our flooding. In this past year, we've started to see some more water getting in the basement. I don't quite like this. There's so much more moisture in coming in, but for a good 10 years, we didn't have flooding in our basement that we had been having regularly. So I think, you know, there's lots of sort of cottage level solutions that we as a community can sort of take on as well. And it's, you know, we could have a walking tour of the hidden rain gardens of Allston, or something like that. Yeah, but I think it's a community effort that we could really all get into.
I live here, and I'm here as a resident because I don't understand any of this, you know. If we're just, by the way, you work for Harvard?
No, I work for the Charles River Watershed Association.
It's like, everybody knows what Magazine Beach is.
Yeah.
Like BU Bridge. I used to see people in the old days swim there a little bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think that's the last thing that's on people's mind, is that swimming in the Charles River. I know there's a law there, so that's good. But I mean, all this, to me, it is great. Hey, let's clean up the thing. But there's a lot more going on here. You know, you talk about buildings, you know, all these buildings like on Western Avenue, Harvard buildings, lab buildings, and the traffic and the bike lanes and all this stuff. It's kind of a mess. And it's the same with the 300 acres. I'm concerned about how the relationship is with these buildings. Now, if you get plain water, I mean, just plain land with no buildings, and then you put buildings on it, what's the difference as far as the drainage is concerned and stuff? Wouldn't the buildings make it a little bit worse than better? I don't know the confusing stuff here, but as a resident, what you said about the water stuff, but the Harvard stuff, that's a whole different ballgame with traffic and what's going on there. And I'm more concerned about that. But anyway, whatever you can add.
Okay, I'm just gonna take that. Then we're gonna go through a couple more slides. And then we'll keep talking. But that, yeah, then we'll hear from Ed. Let me just say one thing about this. That's such a good question. If we build a building, how does that affect what water is doing on a site? And I have a really good answer for this. This is an answer that has some really complicated science behind it. Okay, a lot of different things matter. What's the soil type? You know, what type of cover is on it? Is it trees? Is it grassland? Is it open? But it turns out the answer is mostly very simple. That if we can keep the first inch of water within our property, that is recreating 90% of the way that water originally existed on the landscape. So whether it's a forest, whether it was a meadow, you know, if we're willing to kind of just squint our eyes a little bit, that 1 inch rule is very, very close. And that is, you know, that's literally what Councilor Braden has done in her own home is through a very simple intervention, started to recreate that pre-development hydrology. So, you know, as the Watershed Association, there's so many issues about housing, about transit. That's not our forte. What our forte is saying, okay, if development's going to be happening, how can we make sure that that development moves us back towards that natural hydrology and not farther away from it? So that would be what I'd try and take, you know, what I'd like.
So Max, because this has to do with our development. If a normal naturalistic state, and a lot of the stuff that's getting redeveloped is already paved, so it's even worse than that, obviously. You don't see a lot of trees and naturalistic landscapes on development sites. Is it fair to say that a project site that's 5 acres like Science, if that's taking on 10 inches, that's 10 times better than the natural state? And I don't know the answer to the question.
The answer is no. So, you know, these things kind of, if you've, you know, it's called the curve. So, let's just kind of keep it there. That at 1 inch, you're getting 90% of the water that falls in a year. At 10 inches, you're probably getting 99%. So it's not 10 times better, it's 10% better. Yeah. So there's some efficiency here, and that's why, you know, we kind of have to be careful planning some of this stuff. I'm gonna run through this because we're having such a good conversation, but there's a couple of things I want to make sure that we touch. Mark talked a lot about the IMP. There's another process which is going on right now that BPDA is running, which is about giving input on the greenway. And maybe I'm not going to talk that much about it, but it's an important opportunity to try and reconnect the neighborhood to the river. You know, I think all of us who are in this room want this greenway to be as strong, as successful, as green as possible. We see this as a location to do district scale stormwater management. That's not parcel by parcel, but look at the whole area and think about, you know, how can these parcels feed into this area. Something that we want to talk a little bit more about is Coolidge Road. CRWA really, really feels that this neighborhood deserves to embark on a green streets journey. We can't let all the good stuff be happening in this neighborhood just in new development. Let's use some of that money. Let's use some of that energy. Let's get more trees in the neighborhood. Let's get more stormwater retention in the neighborhood. The point about power lines is a really, really good one. The one that I think about very often is ADA accessibility. You know, where I live, the sidewalks are only like 3.5 feet wide. They're not even wide enough to plant a tree, let alone take my stroller down the street on trash day, because there's just trash cans all over the place. But we are blessed with streets that are a little bit wider than they need to be. Many of the streets were designed to be two-way. Some of them are just big. There's an opportunity to go into the streets, to go into the right of way, and to reclaim some of that space for pedestrians, and to really reclaim some of that space for establishing healthy street trees that are connected to the stormwater infrastructure. And we, with Boston Water and Sewer Commission and the City of Boston, developed some conceptual designs for this Coolidge Road project. Some of this was funded through a grant for Harvard. There is money in the kitty to do this project on Coolidge Road. It hit a real standstill, but I'm really excited to share that the intention from the city is to kick off this project again.
Where's Coolidge Road?
Yeah,
I don't know what that is. It's off of North Harvard Street near the Horn and Allston Library.
Oh, okay, thank you.
It goes from Mansfield to North Harvard.
Yeah, and a really cool thing about Coolidge Road, the reason it was selected for this project, it was identified by neighborhood activists, Galen Mook,
among others, as a place that is a natural extension of the Greenway. So like that Greenway that, you know, Harvard's working on, that comes out, you know, into Arena Park, comes out by the Honan Library, then just kind of deposits you on North Harvard Street. If you want to keep going into the neighborhood, Coolidge Road is kind of the way you're going to do it. So can we make that road as welcoming as possible? Can we extend that green spine and that pedestrian connection into the neighborhood? This is a way to do it. Boston has a new director of green infrastructure, Kate England. She has a budget to do design work, and she has told us that she's committed to bringing this project to 100% design in the next year, and then we're going to find funding to get it into the ground. So we want you to come on out on April 7th. We want to hear what's changed since we designed this project. You know, how are we thinking about it differently? Should we be more ambitious? You know, do we have different concerns than we did previously? We're going to be taking that, you know, we're going to be dusting off these plans, but taking a new look at what can be done on Coolidge Road. We're really committed to making this happen, and I really see this as potentially a blueprint for what we'd like to see happen throughout the neighborhood, if that's the neighborhood's vision. Another big issue is how do we get to, you know, how do we get to the river? Are we crossing, you know, 4 lanes of very fast traffic across Soldiers Field Road to Herder Park? Are we going to be crossing 12 to 14 lanes of traffic across I-90 and Soldiers Field Road to get to the river on the other side? CRWA is really engaged with DCR. Is there anyone from DCR here today? Okay, we really asked DCR to come to this meeting. But I guess we want you to know that DCR is a really important partner in the future of this neighborhood, and they are listening. They really listen to the feedback about the Artisani parking lot project. I don't know how many people were tracking that whole project, but DCR came up with a Herder Park master plan that I think was a really great plan. Then we didn't hear anything for a long time, and then they said, look, we're going to renovate this parking lot. And basically everyone in the neighborhood said, first of all, why is this the only project that's coming out of the master plan? Second of all, this doesn't look like a very good project. And DCR pumped the brakes a little bit. They're taking on board some of that feedback. We're really trying to push them to say this parking lot project should include a retrofit of the Herder Park moat. You know, take it from being a sedimented mosquito breeding ground to something that could really treat stormwater, be much more aesthetic, be more functional from a city perspective, but also be, you know, have better habitat value, have emergent plants for wildlife. They're listening. They've incorporated that into their current specifications to their engineer, which is niche. So I just want to say they're listening. So let's have that conversation. Let's communicate clearly what we want to see to DCR. If we want to see a Soldiers Field road diet, and this neighborhood can speak up for that firmly and enthusiastically, you know, it really can happen. You know, another one, I-90. I'm not going to talk about it. It's a huge issue. Tony, you know, rightly called.
I'm not going to talk about it.
He called us out recently for calling it a controversial project. Whether it is or not, it's a really important project. It's important to get it right. It's something that we're tracking really closely. And then just kind of a little bit of a call to action to, you know, for the end of this, which is, you know, let's try and think beyond the parcel. Let's try and get green streets going in our neighborhood. Let's make our voices heard to DCR so that we, you know, aren't dealing with this stupid decaying sidewalk on Everett Street, and we don't even have a crosswalk to get across Soldiers Field Road. And, you know, literally the people in this room, if we get together and stay together, we can make all of this happen. Yeah.
Do you have a plan for how we can do that? How do we speak with one voice if we don't know what the one voice needs to say. I mean, you've said a lot here, but just in terms of getting us all to agree on something and sign our names to the bottom, how do we do that?
Okay, Emily Norton.
I'm sorry, I was a little bit late, folks. Again, I'm Emily Norton. I'm the executive director. We can have a lot of smart sciencey stuff, and I am nowhere near as smart as these folks. I was a philosophy major. But your counselor, your mayor, your state senator, if they were in their heart of hearts, they were to be honest, they don't really care that much about what we have to say. What they really care about are the voices of their voters. So what we try to do is break down the information in ways that you can understand and in a very respectful way. We're not here saying, hopefully you've not taken this away, like we're telling you to do this. We're saying, here's the science, here's the history of the area, here's how water moves, here's what cyanobacteria really is. I'd never heard that before. That's awesome. For you to use this information to have conversations with your elected officials on what you want. So if this has been helpful, that is our goal. If we can break this down for you even more with, well, if you agree with what you've heard, here's literally the bullet points to ask for, then we will do that, because that is why we are here. We are advocacy groups to speak for the river, but it's really about a healthier, more resilient world for all of us. We've made these decisions over the last 400 years about how water moves and how the built environment is that allow us to have modern lives. But now it's coming to sort of bite us in the ass in some ways. And so now we need to address that so that we can be safe in the future. So this really is about empowering all of you. So we will break this down even further for you. You have my word.
That was a perfect segue. In the back of the room and online, we've got just a couple things to say. First of all, we're doing a rain barrel giveaway. This is one of the easiest things you can do, even easier than what Liz did, digging her own rain garden.
It bounces well. So.
Okay. But sign up for a rain barrel. Think of it as a down payment on your commitment to changing the way water flows through our city. Here's our information. We've also posted kind of a citizen advocacy guide for what we should be asking for from large projects. And then I just kind of my other take on your question too is like, we hope that, I think something that doesn't work, something that maybe isn't good enough is just using the existing public input processes to get what we want. So I think, what we're hoping to contribute to is kind of like a side channel neighborhood conversation that's got to be about much more than just river health. But so that, outside of the projects, this neighborhood can start thinking more clearly about what are the community benefits that are the highest priority. What is the vision that we need, instead of just, dealing with it by parcel basis.
An offbeat question, and I just thought about it because I walk home from work a lot, which involves walking along the river, across the river, and around the streets of Allston. Salt.
Yeah.
Has the Charles River Watershed done any studies about the impact of the tens of thousands of pounds of salt that we spread over the entire watershed every year? Because I literally, when I'm walking up Cambridge Street over across the pike, it's like an inch of salt. It's actually slipperier than ice.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I'm walking on like this much salt. I mean, it's ridiculous.
So absolutely, we won't talk about it right now. We've got some information in our yearly water quality report, but we actually deploy chloride loggers. So they measure the conductivity of the water in tributaries throughout the watershed. And we're looking at, okay, what's the conductivity in this area upstream of a major road and then downstream of a major road. Cool. We're entering our second summer of kind of recording this continuous real-time information. I don't want to lose everybody in this room with this answer, but very quickly, if folks are interested, the picture is actually very interesting. Kind of the dummy version is that high salt concentrations in parts of the watershed can be the most toxic thing that's in our water for aquatic life. And then the thing that's new that we're learning, that we're really in a learning moment with this, is that you'd think winter would be the worst time for salt. But what actually happens is it accumulates in the wintertime,
then it gets flushed down into the smaller streams, and it's actually during the drought periods that we see the highest concentrations of salt. So it's a big issue, and we're really tracking it.
Oh, thanks. I just wanted to know if y'all were looking at it.
And let me go to Ed in the back of the room here. Yeah.
Couple of questions. You said that the 84-inch pipe. I know they're putting in a filter system to take out, I guess, the phosphorus. And then you said something about the nutrients.
Yeah.
You say it's going in the river. Is there a filtration system available that can be installed in that big pipe now to stop that?
Such a good question, such a smart question. I want to make a point of clarification that, so when I say nutrients, I'm kind of talking about phosphorus. That filtration system will not remove phosphorus. It will remove grit. It will remove some organic material. There is not currently a cost-effective way to remove phosphorus because phosphorus occurs at pretty low concentrations. We're talking about parts per billion. In the Charles River right now, the phosphorus concentration is 60 parts per billion, and that's enough to cause these blooms. So really, the answer is no. Everybody's trying to find a filter that can do it in a cost-effective way. Boston Water and Sewer Commission right now has a, $450,000 installation of something called biochar, which is in a box culvert, and it's supposed to absorb phosphorus, and they're studying it really closely. But in a way, the answer is upstream is better. We got to get it before it gets into the pipe. Is really the answer so far.
You showed the flooded area. I think it's a big red thing up there.
Yeah.
What streets are involved in that flooded area?
Yeah, so this is first of all, this is a really cool map from Boston Water and Sewer Commission. It's the inundation viewer, and you should check it out online. But it's basically everything south of Western Ave. I'll just say that, and maybe I'll show you the click all the way back.
So everything.
Yeah. Sorry, I mean everything north of Western Ave. We'll go try. This is good to spend some time on. So this is inland stormwater flooding. So this is the water that's coming off the neighborhood. And then this is both inland stormwater flooding and what's coming off of, what's potentially flooding from the river because there's so much water coming into the river. So yeah. I'm here on Raymond Street, so we're okay, but
Thank God, Max. Thank God.
So I swear.
Max, is this ocean water in the neighborhood?
This is not ocean water. That's a really good question. So this is not the dam has been overtopped. There's so much water coming over the Watertown Dam. There's so much water just coming that the elevation of the river is higher than the pumps can keep up with it.
Was the storm in
Can I just-
1997 a 100-year storm, or was that not a 100-year storm? When the flooded, there was like a huge flood in October, washed out head of the Charles in 1997. And I know there was 2 feet of water at the intersection of Greeno Boulevard and Arsenal Street. Was that a 100-year storm, or do you recall, or would you know? Because that was a lot of water.
I should know, and I'm embarrassed that I don't.
I didn't live.
I will learn after this meeting.
I lived in Watertown then, so I was curious.
No, I'm looking at the labeling of the slide. It's my recollection that if you've got 7 feet of sea level rise, you are overtopping the dam at storm surge. I think that's a chart that reflects ocean inundation of the watershed. Looking at the labeling and recalling, we funded studies just on this, and the sort of word was like the ocean always wins. That is the much bigger risk over time. Even when you have that sort of coincident heavy rainfall, it's the storm surge.
Yeah, I will just say the latest version of the inundation viewer has a feature where they're acknowledging that
the dam is gonna have a higher elevation in the future. But you could be right.
Looking at the label.
Max, I just want to clarify, it's not north of Western Avenue, it's north of Cambridge Street on this map.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It's north of Western Avenue and it's, yeah, this whole area north of Cambridge Street. So, right, so with this whole area that we've been talking about, there's a ton of flooding in there.
Your house.
Right.
Yeah.
My house.
And I'll just say, you know, one of the things that Harvard is doing is that they're building their buildings at 14 feet above mean sea level, or kind of above the Charles River level. So they're making sure that their buildings are out of that floodplain. Obviously, no one is raising the rest of the buildings.
That's just a quick continuation of NASDAQ, using it as an example. I've heard that there are, I mean, is this true, like down the river per se, that there are like historical commission considerations that are considered when you're trying to penetrate the Charles? You said that's one of the major challenges for NASDAQ is to get it to the river. Are there historical roadblocks to that as well? Or into the river in general, I should say.
But maybe Senator Brasberg can be the best one to speak to this. I mean, chapter 97, chapter 91.
Senators like the Mass Historical Commission, are there covenants that involve the Charles River that can be brought into play that may prevent penetration of this pipe to the river?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think.
Please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You mentioned permeated sidewalks. I do know that in the Tishman Spot project, which is the ERC project, they are planning on putting in permeated sidewalks when they complete their project. Now, this would be probably for a city councilor. As we replace the sidewalks throughout the city, why can't we replace them with permeated sidewalks?
I think you mentioned Kate England, and she's incredible. She used to work for Boston Water and Sewer, and she's really looking at these issues really carefully. So that's a question that, you know, I always bring up, is about permeability, not only on our sidewalks but also on private properties, so that we give some sort of roadmap for folks to try and guide their if they're overdoing their place, that they can put in permeable surfaces in their yards and things to continue that drainage. So I will take that question back. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll just say, for instance, the sidewalk that's in front of the Science and Engineering campus, those are permeable pavers. So it's, you know, it's not like we don't have the technology, but I don't think that that's been necessarily identified as the most important next step for people to take. One thing I will say is that in Cambridge, they are a bit ahead of, well, I'm not going to say anything like that, but I'll just say one thing that they are doing is that whenever they're doing bike lanes, they make sure that the bike lanes are permeable. And there's a thing about permeable pavers and permeable pavement that's really interesting that you don't necessarily think about, which is that it's less likely to freeze. Because in, you know, around here, a lot of the really bad icy slick stuff that we see, it's like rain that fell and it was wet and then it froze overnight and it iced over. And this is, you know, I've seen a lot of really stark examples of this, but permeable pavement has many fewer of those problems, and you know, because it drains, it's less likely to be icy and it dries off faster, which is great for bike lanes. But yeah.
Yeah, I also wanted to highlight there's, you know, a number of different limiting factors for pervious pavers, but you know, doing it on your driveway is a really good solution of not wanting your driveway to be icy. But, and I'm sure you guys have noticed, one of the things coming out of the Office of Green Infrastructure with the city of Boston is their requirement for, you know, curbs to now include green stormwater infrastructure. So there's a lot of parts of Dorchester where I've seen, you know, new curb bump outs that are now green stormwater infrastructure, whether it's a bioswale or a rain garden. And those, the way, you know, depending on the way it's designed, instead of having, you know, pervious pavers on your sidewalk, can be designed where water from your sidewalk is getting tunneled into those bioswales or rain gardens instead. So there's definitely multiple types of solutions for public sideways.
Yeah, well, let's make sure we got through to Ed's line of thought here.
Okay. There is currently being done on North Harvard Street and already completed on parts of Cambridge Street, underground wire. What Paula has told me, because she spoke to the contractors, they say they're putting it in for the future developments in Allston, Brighton, which is certainly needed. And I know my neighbor here said, yeah, we'd like to see it in our neighborhood. And the thing that bothers me most is our neighborhood, Wyndham, Hopedale, Paula's area, we're the ones that are taking the brunt of the storm here. Yet nobody is willing to come up to the table and put underground wiring on our streets. Right now, just recently, last week, electric company put a large pole up with 3 big transformers on it, just to power one of Harvard's buildings. At the same time going on, it's the underground wiring. Now, I don't know if one hand knew what the other hand was doing. It seems to me that underground wiring, which is going right by that building, could have supplied that building versus putting us this heavy wire, big pole, and 3 great big transformers. Exactly why they needed 3, I don't know. This is a small bakery. It's not a, but I mean, this is something where that bothers me the most. Is the most impacted area right now is around my area. And yet, when we ask for a little thing like, hey, put the underground wiring down. If you're gonna go, it's going to your buildings, for God's sakes, put it down under our street too. If you look on Paula Street, the biggest wire is for Harvard. It isn't for her or us. So, and I'm sure at some point, they're going to be building it back or building more buildings, and an underground wire is going to go there. Down my street, the same thing. Heavy wiring.
No, it's a really good point.
Going to Harvard, not to us. Okay. And, people are talking about what do we do? How do we do it? How do we fight Eversource? Not Harvard, Eversource. To coordinate everything. Similar thing that you're saying with this watershed thing, which leads me into what I would like to see is if we were to do, let's say Harvard, which is 1/3 of the property, what in your mind can you develop a plan that you think would work there in coordination with Boston Water or whoever the other department is? What would that be? Now, let's be realistic. All of it probably can't be done. But if we know now what is needed as a task force and other community people feed into each other, we can go with one voice and say, this is what we want to see. And Harvard would review it. All the other developers would have to review it. And somebody's going to have to enforce it. And I'm talking about the city, the state defense, whoever has to have it done. The money, as you say, there is some available. And, you know, if all that can be coordinated to this community, and I think it can, because I have seen this community, all of the advocates in the community speaking with one voice when they needed things from Harvard and other areas. If we do not work together in unity, it's going to fail, absolutely fail. And if you look at the developers, their plan is to confuse you. Yes, we can do this. Yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do this. The answer is they don't want to do it unless they hear it from the entire community. Now, I've talked about Harvard a lot, but I can say this. I know in the mitigation process with them, they have been very good and very responsive to the needs of the community as construction goes. And, you know, I don't want to just slam Harvard for what they've not done. But I am saying that if this community wants things done, speak with one voice. If you come up with a plan, Max, in coordination, then come to us, come to all the advocates, come to the entire community. We will put it out through the community and we will then demand it. And that's how we're going to get it done. I'm sorry, listen, Liz, of course, will be with it. I'm so sorry, Liz. I shouldn't leave you out. But this is what it takes. Even as Liz answered,